Welcome to Pixels and Paragraphs, the bonus show where you get to hear me, Darren Hupke, interview some of the raddest writers behind the greatest gaming books. Each episode, you get to hear from a new guest as they discuss their book, talk about their process, share some details from behind the keys, and more. Whether you're a fan of the book already or want to find something new to read, be sure to check out the show notes for links to everything we discussed today. And also, check out all the other great shows on the Soundstone Network. All right, welcome everyone to Pixels and Paragraphs, the bonus show where you get to hear me still talking about video games, but in a slightly different fashion. I get to talk to different writers and creators behind some of the kind of raddest and coolest and newest video game books. So on this special episode, I've got Nate Drake, who's writing the upcoming I Am Not Good, The History of Cheating in Video Games. Welcome to the show, Nate, and thanks for taking some time with me today.
Thank you for having me, Darren. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a cool idea. I've nostalgically been attached to like video games for like a long time, but like cheating. I remember having the Game Genie for my NES, and like the day we get to bring that home and unlock so many like beat a lot of games and do things in the games that I had that I was maybe stuck or never could quite get past certain points on. And even just like the large fonts and really ugly UI that had, it like, you know, just brings back memories, like looking at things like that and thinking about things like that. So I'm excited to talk to you about this book.
I'm super stoked too.
This is coming out from Retro Game Books. So Brian, as a friend of the show, I'm really excited to kind of learn more about how that partnership happened. But before we get into the book itself, I'd love to be here, like learn a little bit about you. If you don't mind, maybe giving the listeners a bit of an intro, who you are and your association with, you know, being able to like write about video games here. Like, where did this come from? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Of course, Dan. Well, I think we're about the same age. I was born in 84 and you in 86. So I think we're from that same era. And I remember I had an epiphany I referred to in the introduction of my book. I was sitting there playing the NES one day, and my father, Barry, he came in and he said to me, "Remember, son, no one's ever going to pay you to sit around and play video games." And I remember thinking at the time, that seems strange. And I've dedicated the book to him. Well, I suppose we'll see after all. But my day job is I am a cybersecurity journalist. I write about things to do with security and also to do with hacking. And I've always loved video games. But this book, to me, really, it's about combining those two passions, because there's always been people who've used technology in a way that's unexpected, who've modded it, who've hacked it, and that sort of thing. And the history of cheating, it's actually incredibly messy in many ways. Not all video games are intended to have them. Sometimes we have bugs that are features. But I just found the more you delve into it, and in particular from what you were saying, when people got dedicated devices like the Game Genie to give their games a new lease of life or access hidden areas, it's absolutely fascinating as a topic.
Yeah, the description on Retro Game Books right now, it talks about the book in a way. It says, it takes readers on a journey through the evolution of video game cheats, from the days of secret developer codes and the legendary Konami code to the Game Genie, God Mode glory, and the wild rise of online cheat communities. Along the way, you'll uncover the myths that fooled millions, the legal battles that crushed cheating devices, and the strange charm of cheats that did nothing at all except make everyone's heads enormous. Blending nostalgia and cultural insights, this book explores how cheats shaped the gaming history, not as acts of dishonor, but as expressions of curiosity, innovation, and the sheer joy of pushing the limits. After all, sometimes breaking the rules is half the fun. That is, like, that sets it up. That makes me want to dive in and read that now. I'd love to know, like, what's the, like, you played, you know, you were playing these games early on yourself, you mentioned, but like, what's the inspiration and curiosity there that that brought you to this? Or has it always been scratching an itch in the back of your mind to explore this topic further? Like, what is that origin of this book's idea?
Well, you hit on it at the start of the podcast, slightly, Dan, because you mentioned about the Game Genie helping you with games. And the fact remains that, you know, back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, developers deliberately made games very difficult. It was a matter of capacity, wasn't it? Because you could only fit so much game onto one cartridge. They had to make it difficult so it wouldn't be finished in 5 minutes. Also, as you know, in the States and to a lesser extent in the UK, people would rent video games. People weren't going to pay to rent them if they could finish the game overnight. And for me, I remember as a kid, I had a little Acorn Archimedes computer. The home computer was quite popular in the UK, not so much in the States. And I was lamenting that I was having trouble with a level on the game Lemmings, which originally came out for the Amiga in 1991. And one of my fellow Boy Scouts, where I was at the time when I was lamenting about, casually dropped into the conversation. Well, do you know, if you enter the password, I am not good, you can just tap the space bar to skip levels. And I remember doing this, and I was absolutely transfixed. It was an amazing thing for me. Previously, all these hours of angst and frustration, suddenly you put this one thing in, and that's it. Everything is unlocked. And it really went downhill from there, I think.
Yeah, that's how it is. I'm wondering what the first cheat code that I remember coming across. I remember putting in like the passwords for like Metroid on the NES, and
absolutely.
Like the password to get to Mike Tyson, or Mr. Dream, depending on the version you're playing, for Punch Out.
Indeed.
But yeah, like outright cheats. Obviously the Game Genie was there, but yeah, it's interesting. It goes back to that time. With limited memory, even some games would just be coded to become exponentially harder by recycling maps,
Absolutely.
Maybe changing the colors, maybe things like that. And so these cheats were things to more like test the games or allow developers to skip ahead to like portions to ensure that things were all working properly. But then they became they became a source of entertainment. And so you get to explore that. You dive into the history of how these things worked. What was that process like from a research standpoint? Did you get a chance to interview like developers? Did you read through like old like development histories and things like that? Like what was that like for you?
It was a great fun, this process. It's the part I enjoyed most about writing the book. I circled around this idea for some time, but during the pandemic, of course, we all had more time on our hands, and I would surreptitiously join gaming communities on Facebook, Discord, Reddit, and I'd say to people, as you said, what is the first cheat you remember using, and also what is your favorite one? And what was amazing for me is how overwhelming the response was. One thing, and of course you get different people, they appreciate different types of consoles. They like sports games rather than RPGs. But one thing they all have in common, they have that memory of doing that thing the first way. And then of course I started researching it more seriously, and I must say, like Nadia said to you the other day when you interviewed her, the Internet Archive was an absolute godsend, particularly when it came to getting copies of early gaming magazines and seeing how typing codes and cheats were first explored, and also exploring the manuals for various cheating devices like the Action Replay and the Game Genie.
Yeah, so many magazines, and even Nintendo Power's Origins, like so much it was devoted to tips, strategies, and then ultimately there'd be like entire like cheat code sections where that's what kids wanted to do. Like when you were looking to pick up a magazine, so many would go and buy these monthly issues to get like the latest cheats that could potentially unlock more or get them to access more of the games they already owned or were stuck on or were curious about and everything.
Absolutely. We have Nintendo Power to thank for discovering the Konami code, or at least publishing the Konami code. The very first issue, we have the mysterious Agent 99, who we don't know their identity, of course, but they discovered the code could be inputted in Contra to give you an extra 30 lives for every one of your continues. And that's, of course, why it's sometimes called the 30 lives code instead of the Konami code. But as you mentioned before, this was really a reflection of the fact that developers had very little time, had to churn out games very, very quickly, and often the games were so complex they couldn't complete it in the normal way in the amount of time. That's why, of course, as Moto-san invented the Konami code, simply so he could finish the game, in this case, Gradius, more quickly by getting all the power-ups and do his quality assurance tests, such as they were at the time, in a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they were. They were like a fast track to early QA before you had like teams and studios devoted to things like that. Let just skip to the end and check things out and ensure that the game was ready to go. Because once the game was produced, that was it. It was out in the wild, and there was no patching or enhancing it, after the fact.
Indeed. That's a fascinating contrast between how games used to be done versus how they are in the modern era. These days, if someone discovers a particular glitch in a game they can exploit, or some other totally hidden area they're not supposed to go to, generally speaking, a patch will be issued, and that'll be the end of that. But at the time when a cartridge was released, that was the case. And of course, the Konami code was apparently intended to be removed from the game before the final release. But once they started churning out cartridges, there was nothing to be done. And of course, as time went on, they decided this was going to be a feature and not a bug, and include it in future titles.
Yeah. Yes. So you mentioned it a little bit already, but the origin of this, you said like during like COVID and when we were kind of like, shut down and things like that, and joining a lot of those message boards and everything. When did you get the earliest inclination that you wanted to write this and put like pen to paper or keys to the keyboard on this? What was the earliest time you remember putting words down for it?
Yes, you're absolutely right, because I've been circling around this topic for some time, but it's really in 2020, we're in full swing, we're in lockdown. At the time, I was at home a lot of the time, a little bit of volunteering on the outside, but stuck there. And I just was thinking to myself, what I really would love is to sort of explore the history of this. Now, I was looking everywhere for a book that had already been written on this particular topic. And all I could find was an academic paper by a wonderful Professor Mir Konsaba, who does the foreword to my book, which was as fascinating as it is. I realized that I wanted to write this history myself, so I couldn't read it, so there'll be no accusations of plagiarism. And that's really what it came down to. I thought, why don't we have this all in one place? It's a fascinating story, and people had looked into it in various places. There's so many things like YouTube videos. People will demonstrate that one particular cheat, or people talk in forums about one they remember doing. But no one had brought this all together, so I took it on myself to do so. And originally, I approached a particular publisher with my idea, who said, well, to be honest, Nate, we can't publish this, but if you'd like to write some articles on this subject for us, for our blog, then, you're welcome to do that. And I did about 3 or 4 of these, and I realized if this goes on much further, they're just going to take all 10 or 12 of them and print them out and sandwich them between 2 bits of cardboard, and then we'll have a book. So I thought, and that's when I got into touch with Brian at Retro Game Books, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, and my wonderful editor, Ryan, who helped us bring this to life.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I guess there is a little bit more involved than just, putting it on paper and gluing it between cardboard. There is a bit more of a process behind it, but I imagine so. Very close to it, though. But those early writings that you did those get revised, re-edited, and retooled to be included in this book, or are those external content that you did not recycle or reuse for the book?
I've recycled the concept, and in a couple of cases I would, give the same facts, but the wording is entirely different after all. Of course, this is a story that has to be told. So, for example, we're talking about things like God mode. We simply can't leave out certain things. For example, how in Super Mario you have the Starman, which will give you invincibility for a certain amount of time. How Doom Guy's eyes will light up and start glowing when you type in IDDQD in Doom. So really, it was more a thematic continuation of that sort. But I thought it's best. A dedicated work is in order in this particular case, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned off recording about personally maybe not being as involved in gaming these days than you were then. What eras would you say this book spans? I mean, it took like the earliest days of the codes, but what's the latest game or era that you kind of cover within this book story?
That's an excellent question, Darren. It's something I actually address in the very first chapter and also in the introduction. I begin with an apology. It's a very British thing. We like to apologize a lot, as you know. And I said, look, I'm sorry, this is not an encyclopedia because, of course, depending on when you were born, you're going to be either too early or too late. So, for example, back in the 70s and early 80s, it was all about the type-it-in programs. It published code in magazines, you'd type it in. So if you wanted to make a game harder or more difficult, give yourself more life, you simply altered the code as you went, not really Mario. So I really start mostly in the early 80s when we've got actual commercial video games being produced. And we go right through we talk about certain modern titles because towards the end, I wanted to discuss the elephant in the room, which of course these days it's considered a bit of a taboo subject. These days, of course, we have that seems like Fortnite competitions. We've got thousands of dollars of prize money. People are playing strangers over the internet. It's not considered decent anymore to give yourself some kind of unfair competitive edge, like using an aimbot when you're playing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we have the era where, for example, we talked about where you're playing a Nintendo game single player at home. The only thing that really is at stake is your pride. Can you complete this game on your own, as fiendishly difficult as it is? Or maybe you put a code into the game and you need to give yourself a slight edge.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite cheat code, whether that's you discovered through the research and writing of the book or just something you had from growing up with games. But do you have a personal favorite code or cheat?
Well, I'll give you two answers here. The one I discovered in the writing of the book is one which you can find in Half-Life and certain other Valve titles, and they call it Buddha mode. And what it is that it works in a similar way to God mode in the sense that you can't die if you put it in. But what happens is your hit points, your health can diminish, but it won't go below 1, so you won't die. But you'll still take injuries like normal. And I think it's sometimes used for quality testing and so on. But what I liked about that, when I was reading about it, one of the developers had commented that Buddha mode will make you one with everything, which I think is fantastic.
That's fun.
And that's fantastic. But when I asked people what was their favorite cheat of all time, most people would say in Doom using God mode. That's what I think most gamers of a certain generation remember that. I think possibly because it's the one that gives you the greatest little dopamine rush, because when you enter it on the keyboard, immediately you see the guy's eyes light up, as we said. So that gives you that sort of sense of assurance. Though, of course, in that particular case, it will not protect you against every single type of hazard. And that's an important thing to bear in mind, is that when they say he does never prosper, it is true. Not every single one is going to get you through the entire game.
Yeah, that's funny. I was paranoid about that specifically because in the last book I did in this 32-bit library series, it covers like chunks of the PlayStation library. I do cover one of the Doom games for the PlayStation, and the screenshots that I include in the books are all from my own gameplay. Like I've played through them to a certain extent to capture the screenshot. But for some of the games that allow me to put in cheats to help me get to further moments to capture later screenshots, like, I do that. But in the Doom screenshots, most of the screenshots you can see that I have the God mode enabled and everything to get past a lot of things, just to make it easier for me. And in my head, when I was
screenshot, absolutely.
Yeah, like in my head, I'm like, somebody's going to notice this and know that like I cheated my way to capture these screenshots. But like, it's for the nostalgia. It's for I don't want you to see this the first 3 levels.
Concept, absolutely.
Yeah,
and you're absolutely right. And you asked the part of the reason I stopped gaming was because I do enjoy writing about video games. I do, but as you said, when you need to take that particular screenshot and you just simply want to get that proof of concept. And I remember a few years ago, I was asked to write about Duke Nukem, and I was on the first level. I kept falling over the edge of this building, and what it should have taken about maybe 45 minutes ended up becoming a 4-hour marathon just to get that one particular screenshot. So God bless cheating is all I can say.
It helps us out. It's not just for wrongdoing. Okay, it's for archiving and preservation and storytelling as well. So let us keep the cheats alive, people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are some interesting cheat codes that have like inspired a lot of things. I remember like the Mortal Kombat cheats from the Genesis or the Mega Drive for the worldly folks. But down, up, left, A, right, down, dullard. It was like to get to the cheat menu, I believe was what it was. And then
that's absolutely right.
ABAC ABB, I believe, was the blood code. I could maybe have those both backwards. I don't know, but
you're absolutely right on both caps. You've got good memory.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is there's some like metal band. I think they're from North America, but that their name is ABAC ABB, and I always thought that was like the coolest thing that they band. There was like a metal band with like the, as you'd expect, like really hard to decipher like logo for their band and everything in the traditional metal fashion. But I always thought it was just like the neatest, nerdiest thing that it was the blood code, and how many people didn't realize that. But like this little like nod and wink to me, knowing that it's the blood code and it's probably the coolest, darkest thing they could do as a band. But
it's the most obscure reference, absolutely. And it also says something about the developers' take on this. Of course, they may not necessarily have agreed with the level of censorship for Mortal Kombat. And as you know, that was a seminal game for that. I think it was what really got Congress to wake up and start saying, we need to have some kind of rating system, we need to have some kind of censorship. And as you know, of course, that would change the colour of the supposed grey sweat, I'm doing quote marks in the air here, of course, to red to restore it to the original blood as it was meant to be for the game.
Yeah, that grey sweat wasn't really even sweat, but sure. When you were putting the book together, was there any research or content that didn't make the final draft? Were there things that threads that you were pulling at that just didn't maybe quite come together that were still of interest to you that you would have liked to have put in, or were you able to find a way to integrate most everything that you had in your mind into the book?
as we were finishing the book, we decided in the end to devote a chapter to accessibility. I think this is something which I'm glad about for the modern gaming era, because you particularly go back to the 80s or 90s, there weren't many options for people who might have had physical disabilities that might otherwise hamper their gameplay versus an able-bodied person. So these days, a lot of these options can make gameplay a lot more better, level the playing field for them. You can't think of them as cheating per se, because of course it's simply giving everyone equal opportunities to access the same game. But in the end, I recovered so much information about this, and I was just simply going to mention it in the epilogue, that the editor said to me, well, I think we should devote a whole chapter to this very topic, and you're absolutely right. It is absolutely fascinating. It's also wonderful to see that everyone can access the game on equal terms now.
Yeah, I do appreciate that very much. It's actually one of the topics of like the main primary podcast I do. I've recently spoke to that. Yeah, one of the folks from the No Small Games podcast, Kate, we actually spoke about game difficulty and how we play our games. And that was a recent conversation I had with her on accessibility features and how that works. So I think that episode, technically, I've already recorded that with her. But I'm going to have this episode live for listeners before people can hear that one. But that's just how my process works, y'all. So look forward to a future conversation in the regular Pixels and Polygons feed about this topic more, if you want to hear more about accessibility. But we had a great dialogue about that. And I do very much appreciate the access and the ability for more people to be able to enjoy the entertainment and the medium that are video games without being limited or limitations from like dexterity or access just because of controls and whatnot. So I do enjoy developers spending that time and effort.
We've had a huge cultural shift with that, because I know I've a very good friend, Nick. He's my best friend. He speaks Japanese. He helped me with some of the translation for this book, and he continually teases me because at one time when we were very young, I allegedly played a game in easy mode, and of course there's a bit of a stigma about that. But these days we understand that we need these accessibility options to make sure people can play on the same terms as others. So I look forward to hearing more about that from.
Yeah. So when your process is done here, what type of motivated creator or writer are you? Like once this project was done, did you immediately have like a next idea that you're like already wanting to bake and formulate, or are you giving this like time to breathe before you consider another book, or is this maybe a one-off thing for you right now for the time being, and you'll see what the future holds for you?
That's an excellent question, Darren. I don't know if you've ever been into one of those traditional butchers where they're making what we would call the sausages, you call the wieners in American English, where they're sort of churning out the meat continually into these. Essentially, that's the way I see my writing work, because I write for a living anyway. And I have another idea in the offing, which I'm going to hopefully interest some publishers in, which I'll mention. But essentially, the name of my next idea for my next book is Tofu and Terror. And I really want to delve into the history of the development of Resident Evil 2, the 1998 original, of course, and the 2019 remake. Fascinating story, lots of different aspects to this game. One of the very first PlayStation 1 to come across 2 discs. The wonderful work the developers did to fit it onto one cartridge at the N64, the little add-ons for the Dreamcast version. And of course, again, it was so brilliant, it was remade a few years ago as well. So I think it's an absolutely fascinating story.
Oh, that's cool. You already have got that on-ramp for the next thing. That's rad. I was doing some research on that, and I couldn't quite confirm it, and I wanted to look into it more, so I'm curious to see if this comes up in your research and in the final result of it all. But the reason that the Resident Evil 2 was maybe on multiple discs for the PlayStation, with that there was a bug in their like zapping system, the scenario A and B and vice versa for Claire and Leon, but there was a bug that ended up, instead of addressing that, they just decided to release it onto the 2 discs to space that out and allow the game to play the way it's supposed to play. But it sounds like it could have been resolved and fixed, and it would have been just a single disc game. But whatever the technical hiccup was, they rather patched it, or they rather fixed it by just making it a multi-disc situation instead of finding the root cause of it, which to me that sounds very much like Donkey Kong 64. There was an infamous memory leak bug that they used the expansion pack instead of just fixing it just to get it out in time for the holidays and everything. So
you're absolutely right. They jury-rigged a solution. I think it was to do with some of the audio. Technically, it could fit onto one 700 megabyte CPU, but at the time they realized that the choice was, do we rework all the audio, get iron out these bugs, or do we simply place it on 2 CDs and put it out. So that was, but they didn't realize how it would be perceived by fans. I think that's fascinating because by including 2 CDs, it seemed like a much larger game than it really was. In fact, the gameplay is pretty much the same for most scenarios, whether you're playing as Leon or as Claire. But I think from a psychological point of view, the fact you've got these 2 different scenarios on 2 different CDs, that really captured people's imaginations, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. There was definitely a value. Seeing that double disc case and everything, you thought like you were getting a beefy experience. And I think that was they probably made more money, because of that, rather than just ironing out or compressing, some of the content just to fit it all in the one disc.
Absolutely.
What is your in the writing process? What's your favorite part of writing? Why do you think you spend the time that you do doing this? Why spend all the effort, energy, research, and everything? Like, what about it excites you and help, like, keeps you doing it? What's that favorite part?
It's a good question, Darren. And they say that everyone has a book inside them. In my experience, that's where it probably should remain in many cases. However, I like to think in my case, I know definitely your case, it's great to hear that you're writing these out. And this is something I felt there was a story that should need to be told. And I had read the memoirs of Jack London. He at one point said, I can't remember which book it was, but he said he wanted to find a book like this. And when he couldn't find a book like this, he decided he would write it himself. That's really my motivation for doing it. So try as I might, I found lots of different sources online referring to this. I think it's a very fascinating, diverse topic, but no one had consolidated it into an interesting narrative and probably chronological as well to talk about some of the more popular and interesting aspects of it. I'd like to think that's what I've done with this book. We'll have to see, I suppose, if readers agree with me.
Oh, that's cool. I love that advice. I mean, honestly, that's like doing these conversations. I'm selfishly getting a lot of like fun nuggets of inspiration myself and everything. And that I realize that's part of why I do and write the things I write is because I don't see them. I don't have that book already on my shelf. So part of my inspiration is to like, well, if it's not there, like, why can't I try and do this? And if there's more about it, great. More to love and more to have, on the shelf. So
absolutely,
that's really cool.
If it's something you find fascinating to read yourself, if someone had simply said, this is a book I've written, and you're thinking that's the kind of thing that you would read, of course, it makes perfect sense that you would then be enthusiastic about writing it so you could share that with others.
Yeah, that's always been great advice I've gotten, is to not write for the audience and write for what you think people want, but write for what you would want to read and what inspires you or interests you. And, there will be people who will pick up on that, enjoy that, and find that. And that's what's going to help you find that excitement to do it. But awesome. Anything else about this book that you maybe want to share? You mentioned your editor, Riley, and the foreword, the cover art. Do you know the cover artist involved? Greg Mello is what it looks like it's credited as?
That's absolutely right. I only corresponded with him on Blue Sky. Extremely talented artist. Did the cover both of my book and, of course, for Nadia's book as well, whose book getting published at the same time as mine at Retro Game Books. It's fascinating to me how we made it sort of slightly different so the cover looks familiar enough so we can see things like power-ups and fireballs and so on and so forth without actually doing anything that's lifted directly from a video game. It must be quite an achievement for an artist to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it looks great. I mean, it's I'm very excited to see it. I have personally already pre-ordered my copy. It is available on retrogamebooks.com. If you go to Brian's site there, he has it promoted and highlighted. It's right at the top of the store. So for $15, at least for the US dollars, it's a really good price too. And there's a digital version of it. So definitely.
That's correct. The digital digital version, I think, is $5 and it's $14.95 for the paperback. So you can get a less expensive version.
Yeah, it's super accessible there for you. It sounds very exciting. Like, I can't wait to get my physical copy in and give it a read myself. Anything else you wanted to maybe say or share that we haven't been able to touch on yet in the conversation about the book, or anything to maybe kind of pitch it to anybody who might be on the fence about it?
Well, I would say this is an interesting exercise in psychology and also about the evolution of technology. We mentioned before, for instance, about the fact that cartridges could only hold so much game, so we have to make them so much more difficult. This, in turn, informed the rise of cheating. So I think this is actually a good, accessible book for anyone who's got a general interest in gaming, or particularly in retro gaming. The other thing I would say, the only regret I really have, is we decided, for the great reasons of efficiency and cost, we wouldn't include any illustrations in this particular one, but I can simply point people towards archive.org. The Internet Archive has got everything I've talked about, the magazines, the manuals, illustrations of the cheats in action. It's all there and it's free of charge. You don't need my book for that.
Okay, that's cool. And then what I would like to also do is do you have any recommendations or plugs for people to share? Are there things you currently have been consuming or reading or enjoying that you want to pay it forward and recommend people also check out when they're not, obviously, once they're done pre-ordering your book and ensuring they're securing their own copy of this, of course. Beyond that, what would you recommend somebody check out or enjoy that you've been personally enjoying?
My fellow author, Nadia Osh, is publishing her book with Retro Game Books. She has a wonderful podcast called Retronauts, which I've been enjoying very much recently. I think it's well worth having. And, of course, your podcast as well, of course, is fantastic. I'm listening to some back episodes today.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, the Retronauts, that they are a fantastic folks there. A lot of history there. So many great podcast episodes, but also the writing of so many people involved there. So if you aren't already in the Retronauts cult, if you're listening to this and you're one of the 4 people in the world who have not quite found them yet somehow, please do so. Lots of great stuff over there. If you like anything like you've heard here, you'll enjoy significantly a lot more content over there. So check them out. But thank you for that share. Nate, it's been really fun talking with you. I'm very excited to hear this. I love the idea of these books about game history. It's, it's preservation in their own special way. You get to dive into the history, and what it sounds like this is like doing from the previews that I've seen is being able to just take the idea and the concept and the themes of what we know of cheating and cheat codes, but like tell that story of how that's grown and changed and evolved, and like just being able to see the process in the background of how games development and the game industry has changed and grown with it. So it's a great history book. It's a great story. It's just interesting to hear and see and read. And I'm very much excited that you were able to put this together and that it's done here and ready to go. So everyone go pre-order that. And then I'll definitely be paying attention to you, giving you a follow. Though that next book, Resident Evil 2, I'm also a big fan of that. So I'm loving the idea that you're putting that together next. But any last words, any final words you'd like to say then before we wrap?
Well, I was to echo your words, Darren. This is a fascinating story, a fascinating topic. I like to think the way in which I've told it is also fascinating. So please order early and often. It's available for pre-order at the moment.
Yeah, I'll have links in the show notes. So if you're listening to the podcast, just click down there on the details. There'll be the pre-order link right from Retro Game Books website. There'll be more more information about the book there as well. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening to Nate tell us about the book and for checking out the little spin-off Pixels and Paragraphs show. I don't have a intended release cadence for this. This will just be as I have an opportunity to talk to more wonderful writers and talk and hear about more of their wonderful projects. They'll be sprinkled into the main feed as this is. So if you like this, tell a friend, share on social media, help plug the book and promote it for Retro Game Books and for Nate here. And otherwise, thank you for listening, everyone. You have a great rest of your day.
Okay.